I think perimenopause is a litmus test of how well we take care of ourselves. We take our hormones for granted until they start declining. Women do really well in their teens, 20s, and 30s compensating. They get into their 40s, and as their hormones are changing, as the neurotransmitters are changing, it changes the way you perceive the world and yourself. If we don't change our lifestyle in response to changes in our physiology, it's going to make it a whole lot harder to get through perimenopause into menopause. Many women that actually need progesterone replacement actually are being prescribed anxiety meds and depressive meds. I think a lot of what changes for women is their perception of self. I used to be able to handle X, Y, and Z, and now I feel so much less capable. The pause piece is really helping women understand you need to start changing your lifestyle to match your physiology.
For millions of women, hitting the age of 40 brings a load of symptoms and problems. Unexplained bloating, stubborn weight gain, brain fog, and numerous other health issues, emotional ups and downs, even though their lifestyle hasn't changed. And today I'm joined by nurse practitioner and health expert, Cynthia Thurlow. She's a best-selling author. And today we're going to uncover exactly why during perimenopause and menopause your hormones can be out of balance, how to bring them back into balance using food, herbs, and lifestyle medicine. And we'll specifically dive into how the liver and the gut microbiome play a key role in bringing your hormones back into balance. Cynthia, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm excited for this conversation because this has been a topic I've been really passionate about, is helping women and entire families heal and balance their hormones. And for so many women today, they're dealing with symptoms because of perimenopause and menopause. And this is something you've helped a lot of women with. You've really walked them through how to naturally, in most cases, heal and balance their hormones. I've got a lot of questions for you today about everything from hormone replacement therapy, the top vitamins and supplements for perimenopause and menopause, the root causes. But that's sort of where I'd like to start in getting into is most people today, when they think about hormone issues or menopause, they think, well, this is just natural. This is the way it should be. I'm going to have these symptoms. My doctor said, hey, this is menopause. This is just the way it is. Is that reality?
I think that menopause, if you live long enough, is a natural process. That is correct, but it's not optimal in the sense that we really do have to adjust our lifestyle. We have to address our nutrition. We need to address our quality of sleep, how we manage our stress, boundaries, as well as looking seriously at targeted supplementation plus or minus hormone replacement therapy, because utilizing those levers are going to be a differentiator for who's just surviving through middle age and beyond and those that are thriving.
Yeah, one of the things I've really encouraged my patients to do is not turn to hormone replacement therapy first. It's not to say that for some women it's not beneficial, because I think there is a group that it's beneficial for, but it's never the thing I like to do first, because oftentimes there's underlying insulin issues, liver issues, or as you've talked about for many years now, gut issues that can be the underlying cause. So when you think about if a woman's going through menopause, well, first talk to me about what's happening physiologically that can actually cause these symptoms that women have, like dryness and hot flashes and some of the other major symptoms that a lot of women are experiencing.
Yeah, I mean, I always think about perimenopause from the perspective of what really is the differentiator, the beginning of perimenopause. It's that our ovaries are making less progesterone, and that can show up as 1 to 2 weeks before you get your menstrual cycle, you're suddenly start having more anxiety, more depression. You can get mood changes. You may feel more anxious. You may also have sleep alteration. So that is definitely a direct byproduct of not just that loss of progesterone, but also changes in a key neurotransmitter called GABA, which is our main inhibitory neurotransmitter. So there's that piece. Then there's also estradiol. It's our predominant form of estrogen that our bodies make up until menopause. And so as estradiol levels are changing, we may see traditional allopathic medicine doesn't like this phrase, but I'm going to use it, relative estrogen dominance, because we have less progesterone and we have relatively more circulating estradiol. And there's actual research to demonstrate that our estradiol levels can be 20 to 30% higher in perimenopause, which is what provokes a lot
Wow.
of symptoms. We may have brain fog, we may have breast tenderness, we may deal with the dreaded weight loss resistance, we may have a lot of vasomotor symptoms. So hot flashes, night sweats. For a lot of women, they start seeing much heavier menstrual cycles, and that can be bothersome and troublesome. Then we really start thinking about digestive changes, bloating, constipation, or diarrhea. They might have an alternation between, like IBS SAT
Yeah.
patterns, alternating between constipation and diarrhea. And that's just the tipping point. And so when I'm thinking about what are some of the key things that we start seeing pretty quickly as we're navigating early to mid perimenopause, those are the typical things that I'm seeing, not to mention the fact if we're having alterations in sleep, we are also going to have alterations in cortisol.
That's right.
And cortisol, as I always say, it's not a bad hormone, but it gets a bad rap, helping women understand that when cortisol is high over time, it is going to lead to elevated levels of glucose. So you will become progressively more insulin resistant. That can also be worsened by changes in estrogen and changes in muscle mass. But cortisol is also catabolic. So if over time you're super stressed all the time, you're not managing your stress appropriately, you're going to get breakdown of that very precious muscle tissue. So sarcopenia starts to unwind, this muscle loss with aging, not to mention the fact high cortisol is going to beget changes in immune system function, which means you're going to be more susceptible to getting sick. You're also going to be more susceptible to leaky gut. And leaky gut is really at the basis for autoimmune conditions.
That's
And
right.
women are 4 to 5 times more likely to deal with that. So it really becomes this domino effect of hormonal changes, not just progesterone, estrogen, testosterone, but also these other key hormones, cortisol, glucose, and understanding how they influence and can worsen some of these symptoms that we're experiencing midlife.
I always like to look at things in terms of a cascade. Like, what is
Mhm.
that thing that's tipping off everything else? And one of the things I do at my clinics is I look at so much blood work,
Mhm.
and I see cortisol being one of these hormones that affects every other hormone. And I went through this on a recent podcast. I went through what some researchers years ago called the cortisol steal
Yep.
sort of cascade, right? And
Mhm.
so you've got your pregnenolone and sort of how that breaks down then into progesterone and then the other sex hormones. But cortisol is
Mhm.
like, hey, I'm going to take all the resources from progesterone, from testosterone, from all these other hormones and take them myself. And that starts to deplete that progesterone. But I mean, that is such a key thing, and one other thing I thought about as you were talking here, as I was thinking about my own mom.
Mhm.
My mom, the first time she was diagnosed with cancer was 41 years old.
Wow.
And it just reminds me of like so many of the patients I care for and a lot of the women
Mhm.
you care for that are entering perimenopause. My mom was in perimenopause, and she had 3 kids. She was stressed, definitely high cortisol, high estrogen, low
Mhm.
progesterone, all of those issues. And that even led to cancer. And you think about part of what can happen there too, and that connection between the liver and the
Mhm.
gut, her not detoxifying well. By the way, her number one symptom she would have told you that she was dealing with and struggling with right before her cancer diagnosis, and then especially after it was an even bigger problem, was chronic constipation.
Yeah.
And this is something you write about in your book,
Yeah.
how our gut microbiome, and especially the health of our bowel movements and
Mhm.
constipation, is a key factor even in our hormonal health.
Yeah, and it's so interesting that we have normalized women being constipated because I know when I'm having conversations, I'll say, help me understand what constipation means to you. Because you and I may say, I think you should be pooping every day. That should be
Yeah,
normalized. I have patients that think it's normal because it's their normal to poop 2 or 3 times a week. And so when you start
that's
thinking
right.
about the fact that if we are not able to properly package up estrogen, like let's use that as an example, there's a
Yep.
part of the microbiome where there's specific bacteria in the estrobolome that help us break down and package up estrogen, which we should be able to then eliminate through our feces, our poop. But for a lot of people, if their microbiome is not optimal heading into middle age, that can make it worse. You can recirculate some of these estrogens, which can magnify those symptoms, not just the hot flashes, vasomotor symptoms, but a lot of the brain fog and other symptoms that women experience.
Yeah.
So normalizing, helping women understand we have 2 phases of detoxification in our liver, and really then it goes to the gut. And so the gut microbiome is critically important, the health of that microbiome,
Yeah.
for whether or not we are able to effectively break down, package up, and poop out that excess estrogen.
I think a lot of people maybe have a hard time. And by the way, I think this is going to be so key for everyone to understand. I think a lot of people don't think of estrogen because it's a hormone. They don't think of, oh, I need to detoxify. I think they're thinking, oh, I need to detoxify of forever chemicals and glyphosate and heavy metals like mercury. I need to detoxify those. But we need to detoxify estrogen. I recently did a podcast on how to do a parasite cleanse. And there were several steps that you can't miss if you want to properly detoxify. And one of those things was like have a binder, certain types of fiber, like it'll help with that. But estrogen's the same thing because your liver takes all this estrogen that you have too much of, it packages it, puts it in your gut and says, okay, now get rid of it. But if you have the wrong type of bacteria in your gut, your body can create these enzymes that basically then this estrogen breaks apart. It can recirculate in your body. So you have all this excess estrogen, increases your risk of breast cancer, can cause these menopausal symptoms, all these issues. But walk me through, do you have a process for women or some key things in terms of what do women need to do to detoxify excess estrogen properly?
Well, I think, from the perspective, we have key organs for detoxification in the body. So our skin, our liver, our lungs, our bowels, so, defecation, pooping, and as well as urination. But there are things that make it harder, like if you're chronically dehydrated. So number one, like really easy thing to think about, are you properly hydrating your body? And I think most of us walk around being chronically dehydrated. You add in the changes that are happening with estrogen as it's declining, we lose our ability to stay as well hydrated. Like we actually physiologically, in the presence of less estrogen, high FSH, follicular stimulating hormone, our bodies become much less efficient at staying hydrated. So we become physiologically more challenged, but not impossible. So number one, hydration. Number two is thinking thoughtfully about fiber. And I know fiber has now become the new F word. Depending on who I'm talking to, they're like, don't talk about fiber. We don't need fiber. We do need fiber. Fiber is very important for a variety of things. But as our hormones are declining, as the microbiome is changing, we need fiber because our production of something called short-chain fatty acids declines. These are important signaling molecules, and one of the things that they do is they help reduce inflammation. They help with endogenous GLP-1 regulation. I know these drugs are very popular right now, but they're also important for signaling molecules. They can cross the blood-brain barrier like butyrate can. So fiber becomes important because along with bile, which is designed to break down and emulsify fats, as estrogen's declining, again, we start taking a hit with being able to break down and process fats. So fiber is helpful for binding to these bile acids and effectively helping us package up the excess estrogen and excrete it from our bodies, poop it out. So when I'm thinking about how detoxification works, it's helping women understand we want to sweat, so we want to make sure we're exercising. We want to make sure that we're staying hydrated, that if we have access to things like sauna, that can be very beneficial. Dry brushing, also helping women understand that the fiber piece becomes important. And for everyone that's listening, fibers vary bio-individual. What Josh may be able to consume on a daily basis might be different than what I do, as well as our spouses and other people, patients that we take care of. Also thinking thoughtfully about cruciferous vegetables, thinking thoughtfully about, bitter plants. So whether it's radicchio or freeze or arugula, like those bitter compounds are going to be very helpful and beneficial to supporting detoxification efforts. And I think, there's this other piece of what genetics play a role in. Like I have something called MTHFR, which 70% of the population has. I have to work a little harder at phase 2 detoxification. So having a sense of what your personal things that you struggle with, but also understand there's a lot that we can do before we even get to supplements, before we even get to utilizing medications or even hormone replacement therapy. There are things that we can do nutritionally. I would say one other thing that's important is the management of stress. I think for so many of us, we go throughout our lives, we're like, oh, I meditate for 5 minutes on Thursdays. It's so much more unique than that. It's really helping women understand as our hormones are declining, we have to work harder at stress management. So for years, I used to dictate in the hospital or in the office and eat at the same time. not an optimal way to set your body up for digestion, because digestion starts in our brains, not our mouths. If
Yep.
I were to ask kids or most adults, they would say, "Oh, my mouth salivates when I smell something delicious." That's true, but actually it's under the control of the parasympathetic nervous system. But most of us are eating off our kids' plate. We're eating in the car. We're yelling at our spouse while we're trying to eat a meal. And so digestion, understanding that we want to be on that side of the autonomic nervous system, the parasympathetic, because
Yeah.
that is what allows us to absorb nutrients, break nutrients down, secrete enough hydrochloric acid in the stomach to break protein into amino acids, ensure that we're secreting digestive enzymes. So if we're chronically stressed, we're not actually able to break down, assimilate, absorb, detoxify, or even eliminate properly. And that's a part of the conversation that I oftentimes think is really left out, because people are like, it's not important. Digestion just happens. No, we actually have to foster it. We have to work towards it, because it is quite important.
As we've talked about in this episode, mitochondrial health is the foundation for all-day energy, resilience, and long-term wellness. When your mitochondria are supported, everything works better, from metabolism and recovery to how you handle stress. Now, we've covered numerous strategies today, but one powerful tool that supports mitochondrial function and simply feels great is infrared sauna. Targeted infrared light and heat are absorbed at the cellular level, helping support circulation, detox pathways, and mitochondrial efficiency, which is why sauna use shows up so consistently in longevity research. That's why I trust Sunlighten. They've been the leaders in infrared technology for over 25 years, with patented systems designed to deliver high-quality infrared. Their Impulse Sauna, which is the one I have, lets you customize your wavelengths to match your health goals. If supporting mitochondrial health and sustainable energy is a priority for you, learn more at sunlighten.com/axe. Use code AXE to save up to $1,400 off your purchase, with additional savings throughout the year. You said several things there, and I want to just rehash a few of them just so everybody can walk away with something here. And that is, reducing stress is one of the greatest things you could do to improve your overall digestive health and your detoxification. And for most people, it's all about saying no more and having a little bit more margin in your day, like especially around mealtime. Taking time to where not being on your computer, not being working at the same time, just taking 30 minutes and actually eating your meal, chewing, looking outside, just relaxing, and then taking a 15-minute walk afterwards. If you can do that just around your meals, just relax, just take a breather for, 15 to 30 minutes, that will make a huge, huge difference in your digestive health. And then, as Cynthia talked about here too, we need fiber, and really getting a lot of these key vegetables, especially the bitter vegetables and the cruciferous vegetables. The cruciferous vegetables have compounds like indole-3 carbinol. They help shuttle and get rid of more of that excess estrogen out of your body. And the bitters support bile flow, which he was talking about, which is really important as well. So doing, everything from dandelion greens, she talked about radicchio, watercress, arugula, artichokes, all these sort of bitter foods are fantastic for supporting the flow of bile. And then just getting more fiber, and that could be a blend of soluble, insoluble. It can be from everything from oatmeal to, a lot of the vegetables we already talked about. Those are great sources of fiber. Apples are fantastic sources of fiber, berries, pomegranate. And so just doing some of those things will make a big difference in that detoxification process. Now, I want to talk about progesterone again, because I think estrogen is talked about a lot in menopause. It's talked about more. But progesterone was the first thing you mentioned when I asked you what starts to happen during perimenopause. So that starts to decline sometimes, maybe even before the estrogen does. Why does that matter?
Well, because progesterone is, when I think about estrogen and progesterone, they're designed to balance each other out. There's key attributes of both. I always say that estrogen is kind of the queen. We know so much about estrogen. We talk about it a lot. Progesterone is equally important. And I think largely because of the fact that, when progesterone predominates in our menstrual cycle, we tend to need to back off on the intensity of our exercise. We might need to increase our carbohydrate intake. We may need to be doing more relaxing, because it is the hormone that is connected with GABA, this main inhibitory neurotransmitter, and how important that is for us to feel like we can relax and we feel at peace.
Can I just jump in and say this? Like when I first opened my practice, functional medicine practice about 20 years ago, I think the thing that I noticed the most in taking care of a lot of women, especially Gen X women coming in, I would say, like, I kept hearing some of the same words. One, I noticed that they were physically, I would say, frazzled. It was like
Yeah.
they were just so busy. But I'd hear words like, I'm overwhelmed.
Yes.
Like that was the number one key word I would hear them saying, constantly.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think many of us forget these hormones also work in conjunction with neurotransmitters, and the bulk of our neurotransmitters are produced in the gut. So
Right.
as the gut is changing, GABA takes a hit. Things like dopamine take a hit, serotonin, so that also worsens sleep quality. But when I think about the things about progesterone that I think are most beneficial is that replenishing progesterone for a lot of women will improve their other symptoms that they're experiencing. So if you are feeling less anxious, if you are not feeling depressed or feeling almost like a flat mood, we'll use the term anhedonia in traditional medicine, like helping women understand that a lot of the changes they are experiencing at the very beginning of perimenopause are largely a reflection of changes in sleep quality, changes in mood that are oftentimes band-aided with, and I'm going to just say this. Some people need to be on medication. I don't want anyone to feel any sense of shame, but many women that actually need progesterone replacement actually are being prescribed anxiety meds and depressive meds, and they might still need those as well. But I think a lot of what changes for women is their perception of self. I used to be able to handle X, Y, and Z, and now I feel so much less capable. And so your point about the boundaries piece and getting really clear and intentional, I really think of it as it's, the perimenopause, like the pause piece is really helping women understand you need to start changing your lifestyle to match your physiology. I think perimenopause is a litmus test of how well we take care of ourselves. We do a great job of taking care of everyone else in our lives, but in many instances, we're not taking care of ourselves. And so this is an opportunity as progesterone is changing for us to show up differently. Maybe you go to bed 30 minutes earlier. Maybe you say yes to less. And unless it's a hell yes, it's a hell no. And so helping women understand that the way to support progesterone, and we could talk about, progesterone supportive foods, but really in essence, what we are inviting women to do is to take more off of our plate at this time.
Diabetes, cancer, dementia, heart disease. They are coming for many of us and our families, and not for the reason that most people think, which is that it's bad luck or bad genetics. The truth is this: your daily choices are either creating health or setting the stage for disease at the cellular level. And your doctor is probably missing the cellular issues behind your symptoms. Now, I'm currently offering a simple at-home blood test that actually looks for the right warning signs in your blood markers. And just as importantly, it comes with a proper review of your results. This new test flips the script. When you're tired of being dismissed, when you know something isn't right, get my at-home testing of targeted biomarkers, including hormones, thyroid, and metabolism, plus a full hour with one of my senior health advisors to help you understand your results and see if you're a good fit to work with one of our cellular healing protocols at the Health Institute. By the way, these protocols are the same protocols that I created for my mom, that I've created for many patients and clients that have seen incredible results in healing. Grab one before they're gone. Just go to mybloodwork.com. That's mybloodwork.com to get your kit today. I mean, you've probably seen this, and I don't spend a lot of time there, but I spend some on Instagram, and in Facebook, and some of these social media platforms, they have there's accounts I've seen a few times where my wife has showed me, and we've sort of laughed in terms of here's what life's like in your 20s if somebody asks you to go out. You don't even know where you're going, and you're like, yes, I'm going out, right? Your 30s, it's like, I don't know, it better be pretty great. In your 40s, it's like, no. And part of the reason is I think that most of the time by the time people get into their 40s and 50s, there's this sense of overwhelm of I have kids, I've got work, I've got health problems, I'm overcommitted, and so in self-care is the last thing that typically people are thinking of. I want to mention this about progesterone as well. When you look at Chinese medicine, there's always this, and you mentioned this, there's always this relationship between hormones, and in this relationship, Estrogen tends to be what we'd call the yang hormone, which is the dominant, it's the
Mhm.
driver, it's the, and it's actually part of the masculine and feminine, even though we think of estrogen as a very feminine hormone. But progesterone is it's the supportive figure. It's
Mhm.
the, I'm creating the foundation, I'm creating stability. It's your point, it's the
Mhm.
parasympathetic, it's the most
Mhm.
closely tied to that. So if that dips, well, your body has lost its support,
Yeah.
and so then estrogen starts to run rampant,
Mhm.
causing all types of issues. So, I mean, progesterone, I had, do you know Barbara O'Neill?
I do.
So I had Barbara on the podcast last year, and we talked about numerous things, and I was so impressed with her. By the way, her ability to quote the Bible and scripture was amazing.
Amazing.
Her hormonal knowledge, women's health knowledge, was just natural health was all very impressive. But when I asked her about female hormones or hormones in general, what the single most important hormone was, I tend to lean towards cortisol.
Mhm.
But she was very much like, no, you have to balance progesterone. She
Yeah.
was like, that is the key hormone that she found in women that you really need to focus on.
Well, and it's interesting for me, having worked with tens of thousands of women over the past 10 years, I can tell just based on behavioral and communication patterns, the people that probably are not getting sufficient amounts of progesterone, much more so like estrogen can show up as like word finding and brain fog, but progesterone is the are you relaxed and calm? Are you able to communicate effectively and not feel like you're jumping through the screen? And so I think for a lot of women, they're surprised to know because we take our hormones for granted until they start declining. We don't even think about it because they're
Yeah.
just working for us. And if we don't change our if we don't change our lifestyle in response to changes in our physiology, it's going to make it a whole lot harder to, get through perimenopause into menopause.
One of the things I've taught for a long time, and I know you do this in your book and you talk about this as well, which is one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, is really focusing on food as a form of
Mm-hmm.
medicine for our hormones. I was thinking about and looking at the Japanese diet and looking at some of the predominant foods in there. And so you have things like fish is,
Yeah.
of course, highly consumed, but they actually also consume a lot of, in terms of their carbohydrates, most consumed are rice and sweet potatoes.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about rice is it supports GABA.
Mm-hmm.
Sweet potatoes can, or yams, support some level of progesterone or giving the building blocks there. So, of all countries where women are going through and having the least symptoms during
Yeah.
menopause, Japan, the area of Okinawa, is very high on that list. But I look at their diet and it is a form of medicine. It's supporting them as they're going through, this phase in life.
Well, and what I think is so interesting about their culture is like most westernized culture, there is processed foods, but they tend to be very conscientious about the quality of foods that they're
That's right.
eating. And so, yes, they're eating carbohydrate dense rice and sweet potatoes, but they probably are not eating the volume of processed carbohydrates that most Americans are. And I think
Yeah.
that is at the basis. There's been a lot of pushback about carbohydrates in general, and people are sometimes shocked to hear that I'm oftentimes encouraging women to liberalize their healthy carbohydrates
Wow.
because they have dialed in so much on carbs are bad. I only need to worry about protein and fat. And I'm like, no, no, no. You actually need a balance of each, and it's very bio-individual. But I think your
Yeah.
point is an excellent one because we have convinced women that all carbs are bad in many instances. And I'm here to tell you, a proper portion of carbohydrates can make the difference between sleeping well and not sleeping well
Yeah.
for many patients that are really, really sensitive to carbohydrate intake and carbohydrate load.
I saw, when the paleo diet became really
Mhm.
popular, that is when I started seeing a lot of women with these hormonal crashes, with
Mhm.
actually some of them with infertility
Yeah.
issues, major health problems, because it was like, oh, I mean, most of those women that went paleo, it was like no carb. I mean, they went
Yeah.
from, whatever flour they were using to almond flour, right? They made all of these switches. And so it really does come down to, and I love that you're using the word bio-individual. It
Yeah.
comes down to this personalized nutrition.
Yep.
Everybody's unique. We need to dial it in for everybody. And let me ask you, how do you do that in your practice, in working with women in terms of finding what uniquely they need to be eating and supplementing with?
Well, I think it's starting with key themes. So number one, we all know we need more protein. I think we have
Yeah.
that has definitely
Yeah.
trickled down into, media. People understand more protein for muscle protein synthesis because we are working at a little bit of a disadvantage. Women have less lean muscle tissue than men. So heading into perimenopause, understanding we're losing anywhere from 3 to 8% of our muscle mass each decade really is a wake-up call. So protein, no less than 30 grams of protein with each meal. That's kind of a standard basis. Number 2 is thinking thoughtfully about carbohydrates. I am not anti-carb. If someone is obese or overweight, and we know that they have weight they have to lose, then we're talking about portions of carbohydrate and getting really clear and intentional. I want the bulk of your carbohydrates to be coming from fibrous vegetables.
Yep.
And I would say it's a 3-to-1 ratio, 3 vegetables to 1 piece of fruit. It doesn't mean fruit is bad. It just means we have a propensity as Americans to eat sweet things, and
Yep.
fruit usually is where people eat the bulk of their carbohydrates. So 3 vegetables to 1 piece of fruit, being thoughtful. Like, I don't necessarily break it down by soluble versus insoluble or looking even at, ferments. It's
Sure.
eat
Yeah.
more of them. It's getting clear and intentional about fermented foods and probiotic rich foods. So that may look like a tablespoon or 2 of sauerkraut. That may be low sugar kombucha. That may be fermented dairy if they tolerate dairy. Just being clear and intentional as a starting point. Now, fats are something that I think, again, are also very bio-individual. I'm someone that doesn't do well with saturated fat. Although I do have a little bit of it in my diet, I do better with monounsaturated fats. So getting clear about, are we getting our healthy fats in our protein? Like if you have a salmon steak or a ribeye, you don't need to add copious amounts of fat. That is the fat memo that I think many women get wrong, because it's interesting. If you look at the research, 2 women can have a ketogenic diet, which we would arguably say is higher fat, moderate protein, and then less carbohydrates. One woman goes on that diet and does really well. She loses weight. She feels great. The other woman, same diet, same macros, will actually gain weight. And it could have something to do with how her body breaks down and absorbs nutrients. So really
Yeah.
looking at the microbiome, which I think is important. But key concepts are adequate protein intake, getting most of your fiber from fibrous vegetables, looking thoughtfully at, flax and chia seeds, or looking at lentils or beans or other legumes. It doesn't have to be copious amounts. And then those ferments and probiotics, that's usually a good starting point. And then not getting obsessive about the fat piece, because a lot of the fat is in the foods that you're eating. If you're having macadamia nuts or you're having nuts, you're getting healthy fats in those things. So not obsessing over fats, but just making sure it's incorporated either into the protein or adding it in as a supplement.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You used a word earlier, and I'd love for you to explain what it means. Estrobolome.
Mm-hmm. Everyone loves this word, and it's not estrobolome. I actually had a podcast host say the estrobolome, and it took a while for me to regain my composure, but it's a part of the microbiome. It's an estrogen processing center. It's actual bacteria that are designed to break down and allow us to package up and get rid of estrogen. And so for a lot of people, the estrobolome, the health of the estrobolome is largely dependent on all those lifestyle things that we've talked about. It's dependent on, where is the microbiome in terms of diversity, inflammatory species heading into perimenopause. This is why it's important to educate younger women. It's not just a middle-aged woman conversation, but the estrobolome is instrumental for the specific bacteria that help break down estrogen. There's a specific enzyme called beta-glucuronidase, and it's the Goldilocks effect. If you have enough beta-glucuronidase, you can break down and package up the estrogen. If you don't, it can be a sign that you may recirculate this estrogen. And so sometimes when we're doing diagnostic testing, as I'm sure you do in your practice, you can see high beta-glucuronidase, which can be a sign that their detoxification pathways or their detoxification overall needs additional support. But a really important, essential part of the conversation, and no, I did not make this name up. Someone else, far smarter than me, more than 10 years ago, came up with the term estrobolome, but it is speaking about the microbiome and is specifically the bacteria there that are helping to break down, cleave, and get rid of the excess estrogen.
Well, it's incredibly important, and that's one thing I know that you've really talked about is like one of the number one, if not the number one organ that is responsible for hormone balance is your gut microbiome, and part of that is the estrobolome. And so I am in really strong agreement. Now, I would say that I think of it a little bit more in terms of just and you think of it this way
Hmm.
too, but just in verbalizing this, just the entire process of
Hmm.
digestion, because I would say the
Yep.
liver is equally important, and they're
Yep.
kind of partners in the liver and the gut in making this all happen, right? In terms of what happens in the body. I also think about, I work with so many women with hypothyroidism,
Hmm.
and we see this issue with the conversion
Yep.
of T4 to T3. By the way, you might have seen this study. The study came out about a month ago. It was in JAMA. It was in a study out of Yale
Hmm.
where they said, I mean, this is crazy. 21 million women today on levothyroxine
Hmm.
possibly should not be on the drug at all. They said like
It's
90% of women,
astounding.
it's not supporting them, but it is causing depletions in selenium,
Hmm.
zinc, certain B vitamins. So women have been on levothyroxine, this thyroid medication, for years, some of
Hmm.
them 20 years. And it's slowly been causing these other health issues, making maybe their thyroid issues worse. So when they get off it around menopause, they're like, well, either I feel better or my symptoms didn't change at all and I've been on this drug that long. Did
Well,
you?
and it's interesting. So, Synthroid is synthetic thyroid hormone. And what's interesting to me is I had patients that loved Synthroid and were like, they would go into the hospital. They're like, I will not take a generic. I only want trade name Synthroid.
Yeah.
But just giving a medication doesn't necessarily mean that your body knows what to do with it. So, when you're giving Synthroid, this is synthetic T4. Your body still has to take that and make it into usable energy, which is T3. And I think for a lot of individuals, they're given these medications, they don't necessarily feel better, and they're continued on them because they don't know any differently. And so I think that there's very much this bio-individual approach, but also understanding the health of your microbiome has a lot to do with whether or not your body can effectively convert T4 to
That's
T3,
right.
which is the usable form of the thyroid hormone, not to mention the fact with our depleted soil and other things that are going on in our modern day food system, people are already dealing with lower levels of cofactors for thyroid hormone, whether it's iron, whether it's magnesium, whether it's selenium, zinc, et cetera. And so it's really looking at I think it's a bigger issue.
Yeah, yeah, and I think for a lot of women that will get on T4,
Hmm.
levothyroxine or Synthroid, sometimes they'll notice a difference at first because,
Hmm.
okay, you're flooding the body, but then sometimes the body kind of adapts, or you didn't take care of the underlying issue, like the
Right.
high cortisol or something like that. So then you have other sort of problems compiling. Well, you've just sort of covered up, maybe some of these baseline symptoms with the drug. And this is why I am more in favor of like a woman using Throid or Armor or something like
Hmm.
that does have T3 in it in that
Yep.
combination. But overall, what I found is if you are changing your lifestyle, eating the right diet, taking the right supplements like selenium and the other things, most of the time you'll see bigger improvements to where you don't need to be on the thyroid drug. But I remember there are a lot of women who their doctors have told them, you'll be on this drug the rest of your life. It will never, ever change or improve.
Well, it's interesting to me. So I will transparently say that 10 years ago, my functional med nurse practitioner was like, you need thyroid medicine. Like your thyroid numbers are terrible. And we were looking at them and I said, I don't want to be on medicine for the rest of my life. So for 6 months, I was taking a thyroid glandular. I was
Yeah.
using all these cofactors. And 6 months in, I realized I was like, I am exhausted. I cannot function. My hair is falling out. I'm losing my eyebrows. What is going on? I'm also weight loss resistant, which was probably my largest impetus for like, okay, there's something clearly going on here. When I got started on Nature Thyroid,
Yep.
it was as if a light bulb turned on in my brain.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was that dramatic. And so I always remind women, I think for many of us, we're like, I don't want to be on medication, but I think we have to think about hormones differently. I think we have to be thinking that if you need it and you benefit from it and you see improvement intrinsically on labs and in terms of symptoms, that's great. But to your point, a lot of patients, and in traditional allopathic medicine, when I was still in that role, Synthroid was what everyone used, but we didn't understand that sometimes patients can't actually convert it to a usable form of
That's
hormone.
right.
And that's where I think these Nature Thyroid and Armor can be helpful, or even compounded medications
Yeah.
that are made, they're specifically tailored for the patient. I think for a lot of women, it's helping them understand there's no shame if you need meds, but we need to make
Yeah.
sure you actually feel better on the meds.
Yeah, I agree. And for me, and I'm not saying, and just to be clear, I do think there's a time and place for
Correct. Yep.
those. But here's my methodology. It's let's change your diet, let's change your
Mhm.
lifestyle, let's take all the right supplements, let's do the blood work, let's see exactly what you're deficient in. I found 80% of the time it will get you there. And then if we don't, well, then we'll do this for a period of time. And maybe the reason why it's not being fixed is you're going through a really stressful time in your life, cortisol staying high. But a lot of times after a couple of years, maybe we're out of that phase and we can find a way to wean you off that over time. But that's not the mindset of most doctors today. Even it's not that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, for each one of us as individuals, something that works for you or 5 people over here might be very different than what works for me.
Of
And
course.
that's where I think honoring our own bio individuality. And quite honestly, I have patients that'll say to me, I want to do everything I can to avoid taking medicine. And I'm like, we can work with that.
Yeah.
But if we get to a point where you're going to benefit from a medication, I want you to feel no sense of shame for that being the case.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes sense. So when women start going through this perimenopause and menopausal period, there are things that I know we want to do to start to support the body.
Mhm.
What are some of the things we talked a little about food? We talked about fiber, increasing protein, eating more probiotic rich foods.
Mhm.
I know these are all important. What are some things people can do from a supplement standpoint? Are there any even more essential vitamins, nutrients, other compounds that can really benefit women?
Well, I think at a very basic level, almost every patient I interact with needs magnesium replacement. It has 400 enzymatic reactions in the body. And as a former cardiology nerd, there are very few women I interact with that don't need magnesium. So magnesium's number one. Vitamin D, being thoughtful about that. I would say that adaptogenic herbs are some of my favorite things
Mm,
to use because they are so tonifying for cortisol. So we've talked a lot around cortisol, but there are specific adaptogenic herbs. These are natural plant-based compounds that can help tonify. Like if you need to be stimulated, like you're feeling tired, ashwagandha is great because it can be both stimulating and also tonifying, meaning it
yeah.
can help raise cortisol, it can help balance cortisol. And I think that's always a good one. If someone's struggling with sleep, we start thinking about rhodiola, relora as being fantastic options. So adaptogenic herbs, I think a lot about creatine monohydrate. And I think many people like the gym bros know it's good for strength gains, but the research is starting to evolve in a way that it's very thoughtful. It can help for jet lag, sleep architecture. How many women in middle age are struggling with sleep issues? Also bone health, but obviously you need higher doses if you want to cross the blood-brain barrier. And
Yeah.
so typically we're saying 8 to 10 grams is what we are looking at if we want to be able to do brain, bone support, and also some emerging research about the gut microbiome. So I think creatine is one of these supplements that can hit multiple things. And I love when supplements have more than one indication. I also think about digestive support. So if I suspect someone needs hydrochloric acid or pepsin, looking at digestive enzymes, one of my favorite supplements for middle-aged women is TUDCA,
Oh,
which is
yeah.
an acronym, but it is helpful for bile acid support, but also mitochondrial support, and really at the basis for a lot of the symptoms women experience in midlife, and frankly for men too, is mitochondrial dysfunction.
That's
So I
right.
think a great deal about that. I would say other things like urolithin A. We know most people can't get enough from the food, unfortunately. Our microbiomes are largely dependent on
That's
that.
right.
So, yes, you can have pomegranates, yes, you can have walnuts, but urolithin A can be very helpful for upregulating mitophagy, which is getting rid of those diseased, disordered mitochondria, which are the powerhouses of our cells. But those are like maybe myo-inositol too, because it helps a lot of women sleep.
Yeah.
I think, before the GLP-1s came around, we would talk about myo-inositol for blood sugar support or berberine, which are still helpful to a point. But I think about myo-inositol as a total game changer for sleep support in many, many ways. Those are things that I think about, like most women benefit from those, even if it's just transiently. Like
Yeah.
maybe someone just takes the adaptogenic herbs around stressful circumstances, but those are the things I'm thinking about. Now, obviously, there are more things that I love, but I try to keep it kind of condensed. Do you need digestive support? Do you need sleep support? What's going to be a multifactorial supplement that you can use? And that's why I think creatine is such a great option.
And I think for women being able to pinpoint, as you talked about, this personalized medicine of figuring out what is it that your body needs most. Listen, you
Mm-hmm.
can't take 100 supplements,
Yep.
but being able to key in on, is it cortisol? Is it a nutrient deficiency? Is it really driven by estrogen or
Mm-hmm.
progesterone just dropping so suddenly? Then there's black cohosh and red clover, and a lot of those sort of herbs can be great. But overall, a lot of these adaptogenic herbs that are getting cortisol back in
Mm-hmm.
balance, because that is, of course, incredibly important to your point there as well. Um,
Josh, people
Yeah.
always ask me about fiber, like fiber supplements.
Yeah.
And I would say try to get it from food-based sources first. If you're
Yeah.
really deficient and you're really struggling, then we try to keep it simple. Like psyllium husk, organic psyllium husk is a good option.
Yeah.
Fresh ground flax and chia seeds. I think that is so gentle. I always say to people, I'm like, listen, put it in a smoothie and call it a day. It's such an easy way to bump up not only your protein intake, but also giving you some good fiber intake as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. So, Cynthia, one of the things that's happening so often today in our conventional medical system is when women have their hormones start to become more imbalanced, more apparently imbalanced, they're running to HRT.
Mhm.
And this happened even more so, I saw in the natural health community. It was funny because I saw when they removed the black box warning, RFK did, I thought to myself, you know what? I understand that's fine. It makes sense. But also, it was this thing where it's like liberating women. And I thought, well, I don't know. I mean, the thing that I worried about with it, I'm being real
Mhm.
honest. By the way, my heart is very much thinking about my mom who had cancer, my wife, my sister, my patients, and people who I didn't want them to think, oh, well, that just means it's completely safe. It's the first thing I should do and run out and get hormone replacement therapy. Because I thought some people, even in the natural health community,
Mhm.
kind of came out and that was a little bit of their demeanor. Now, listen, everybody has a different opinion. My opinion might be different than yours. But I also want to say I have had 3 women, and we take care of a lot of
Mhm.
and support a lot of women with cancer in my clinic. And I had 3 women, they were all in their 30s, got on hormone replacement therapy, and the next year diagnosed with breast cancer. And
Mm.
I see it often. Now, I do want to say that I do like hormone replacement therapy for the right woman at the right time if they're doing the right things, right? But my issue has been that, and I'd say the same for TRT for men.
Right.
It's like, okay, your testosterone's low, your free testosterone's low. Um, let's do some zinc. Let's get vitamin D. Let's get boron. Let's lift weights. Let's get better sleep. Let's do what we can. And then if we're still having issues in 3 months, even, okay, there's a time and place.
Mhm.
There's a time and place for that. But so often today, people just want to do the cookie cutter thing and just say it's fine, everybody. Just if you want it, here you go. Versus personalizing this for women out there. What are your thoughts on HRT?
Yeah, so I think you bring up some good points. So, number one, it is very much a personalized approach. I think that we have whittled perimenopause and menopause down to just slapping on an estrogen patch and peace out. Like, that's all we have to do. It's not to suggest that hormones are not important. I take hormone replacement therapy, so I want to be fully
Sure.
transparent. What I think is important is that when we look kind of globally at women, and certainly when I worked in clinical cardiology, I saw a lot of older women in the ICU that were septic. And they were septic because they had a urinary tract infection, which could have been prevented by something as simple as vaginal estrogen, which stays very localized to the vagina. So I'll just put that out there. 70% reduction in hospitalizations just with vaginal estrogen. So vaginal estrogen for all women, because genitourinary syndrome of menopause is not a question of if, but when. So that's one thing. And even cancer survivors can safely take vaginal estrogen because it's not systemic. Ideally, it's not systemic. It's not supposed to be systemic. When I think we're talking about a larger conversation to lifestyle, it is lifestyle first. We really have to manage stress. We have to prioritize sleep. We need to eat less often. It doesn't mean everyone's intermittent fasting. We need to eat anti-inflammatory nutrition. We need to lift weights and maintain muscle mass. And then it's also thinking about, like, when do we layer in hormones? Is that appropriate? Is that what the woman wants? Number
Yeah.
one, I think fully informed consent is talking about here are the pros and cons. We know that estrogen can be primary prevention for osteoporosis, which is a bone disease, and we don't want that to happen. So it's helping women understand, do we start with oral progesterone when you're in your early 40s, when you can't sleep and you have anxiety and depression? I think that is reasonable. I think that, do we layer in estrogen? Is that appropriate for you? So again, it's this ongoing conversation.
Yeah.
What are the benefits? What are the risks? Looking at estrogen therapy and saying, what are the benefits of estrogen therapy? Are you going to get improvement in cognition? Are you going to have less brain fog? Are you going to be able to not struggle with word finding? Are you someone that is going to be able to protect your bones? Are you going to have improved skin? Are you going to have a reduction in cardiovascular disease? That is the number one killer of women. 1 in 3 women will die of heart disease. So I start to talk about helping women understand, like, if you're making this decision, whether it's to take HRT or not, understanding that there is still this inflammatory process that is going on behind the scenes, changes in immune system function. We didn't even touch on that, but the immune system starts to unwind, 4 to 5 times more likely to develop autoimmune conditions in midlife. So when I'm talking to women, helping educate them about changes to brain health, changes to bone health, changes to heart health, microbiome, immune system function, mood peace, and not to mention the superficial stuff, like we know as we're losing estrogen, we're losing collagen and elastin, so we'll start seeing changes in our skin as well as body composition. It's like, what are we going to do to augment for that? And so I think that's part of the conversation. We're not looking to replenish hormones back to when we were 20. What we're doing is to provide enough hormones so that we're reducing symptoms and protecting all those body systems I just talked about. And unfortunately, I think that a lot of people just think about HRT as bone, brain, heart health. And I'm like, no, no, no. These hormones touch every single cell in the body. And so I think as I understand more about the conversation, it's just helping women understand, here are your options. What are you comfortable with? And it's no longer this 5-year window. Like, you go into menopause at 47, you can only start hormones within that 5-year window. We know that it's also about like risk stratification. So if someone's 60 and they're 10 years into menopause, can they think about HRT? Yes, but, it requires a cardiovascular risk evaluation. They'll probably do, I prefer doing CT angio or clearly, but you can also do a coronary artery calcification scan, which is not invasive and very inexpensive, but really getting a sense of what's your personal risk, what are you comfortable with, and then getting clear and intentional about what you desire to do and matching you up with a clinician that can help you with that.
Yeah, yeah. It makes sense. Again, the whole thing I've been trying to preach here for a long time is let's get your own body working
Yeah.
again to its ideal state and then see where we're at. And that's not what I see being done most of the time, and it's like, okay, if cortisol's too high, if estrogen's too high, if your gut is off, if your liver's off, let's do everything we can to naturally fix those things. And then if you still need there, then hey, I'm glad it's there. But that's again, that's happening in, less than 10% of cases, unfortunately. Good news is, as we've been talking about, there are so many natural things that people can do to balance their hormones. Last question I have for you, and this is something that I know you've written about, and it's something that I talk about on the show to a degree, but you really hit on it in a different way. And that is how stress can impact, and not even like stress that we're having today, but stress that people have had 20, 30, 40 years ago, how that's impacting their hormonal health and actually causing organs to age more quickly.
Yeah, Josh, this is one of the aspects of writing the book that I found shocking, was that understanding the research that is done. There was a joint venture between Kaiser Permanente and the CDC looking at adverse childhood events, and anyone watching or listening can go online and you can get access to a fairly short quiz. But individuals with high ACE scores, so adverse childhood events, are at greater risk for poor metabolic health, certain types of cancers, disordered relationships with food, and earlier menopause, because our ovaries are our most mitochondrial dense organ in our bodies. We've been talking a lot about cortisol. Cortisol is not a bad hormone, but it gets a bad rap. And if we understand physiologically what's happening when we are chronically activated in our sympathetic nervous system, over time, that is rewiring our autonomic nervous system. That is rewiring our perception of stress. So if you have a high ACE score, like I do, growing up, and not even, I'm a very, on paper, from what everyone can see, very successful. Women do really well in their teens, 20s, and 30s compensating. They get into their 40s, and as their hormones are changing, as the neurotransmitters are changing, it changes the way you perceive the world and yourself. And so I always say that many women who are really well regulated in their earlier years start to unwind in midlife. And a lot of it has to do with significant underlying trauma or even PTSD that is unwinding as our physiology is changing. We just don't regulate quite as effectively. That doesn't mean that that's the end. It just means that we have to work a little harder. For me, I left traditional allopathic medicine 10 years ago, had a lot to do with I could not manage the stress of that work anymore. And I think for a lot of women, it's helping them understand chronic stress ages our ovaries, full stop. And so most mitochondrial dense organ in our bodies, it's the canary in the coal mine. So when I see women that are going into menopause early or going in at 45, 46, 47, 48, maybe that's naturally where they were going to be. But more often than not, when we start unpacking their childhood, their young adulthood, almost always having significant PTSD or trauma that is, I think, contributing to what they are experiencing at a younger age. Average age of menopause in the United States is 51. 45 is quite different. That means you're going 6 additional years without those protective hormones.
Well, I think about this. And there are phases in your life where you really notice, okay, you're aging more quickly. I've talked about this, and you've talked about this in terms of all these excess chemicals in our food supply and how women are hitting, girls are hitting menses way earlier than they should. I mean, if you look back, a lot of times it's 11 years old, 12 years old, 13. It should be closer to 16 or 17. I mean, much, much later on. And then you have this other shift, as you're talking about in life, where your hormones are diving down so much quicker. And this is a sign of premature aging. You're aging more quickly. In Chinese medicine, that area of the body is tied with fear. And so if there's a lot of fear in your life and, narratives from the past or beating yourself up, negative self-talk, you actually are aging that organ more quickly. There's a study a few years ago that found that, we can look at blood work too and look at certain markers to see that for most people, they have one organ aging more quickly than another. And so for you, if it's your ovaries, if it's your reproductive organs, it's going to impact your whole body. Your entire, not only are your ovaries aging more quickly because they're so responsible for things like estrogen and progesterone, it causes your whole body to age more quickly. So it's a really big deal for longevity as well.
Yeah, and I think, the big takeaway I want, if someone is listening and they're like, yeah, I did. I grew up and I had an abusive parent, or I was physically neglected, or there was significant abuse. It's helping them understand, like, you can come out on the other side. That is not, I don't want the message to be that it's doom and gloom. It's understanding you have to do a little more work. Like, you genuinely have to do a little bit of extra. But I think for most women, they want to feel regulated. They want to feel good in their bodies. They want to have good interpersonal relationship skills. I always look at the statistic that 70% of divorces are initiated by women. How many of those divorces are initiated by individuals that are dealing with all the neurotransmitter change, the hormonal fluctuations, and their ability to compensate is just not what it was when they were younger?
I mean, this is a much deeper topic here. I think part of this has to do with the sort of lack of biblical literacy. Like in school, people used to actually have a lot more Christian education, and then they learned stories of the Bible and had a relationship with Jesus, and so they were better able to balance themselves. I mean, sort of that spiritual wisdom and understanding allows you to better regulate your emotions and hormones. That's actually been pulled out of schools. That's a whole nother show, a whole nother topic, but I actually think that's another reason why there's sometimes this level of emotional instability or having trouble regulating emotions, is because if you don't believe in a God who's protecting you and for you and surrounding you, of course you're going to have a greater level of fear and anxiousness and worry in your life. And so I think that's important as well. Well, I've loved this conversation, and Cynthia, I really appreciate you coming on. I want to encourage everybody, check out Cynthia's new book, just released here recently, called The Menopause Gut. It really walks you through how to fly through menopause, the right foods to start eating, a lot of what we talked about, but going in more depth here in her new book. It's in bookstores nationwide. It's on Amazon.com. Again, it's called The Menopause Gut. Also, you can find more about Cynthia on her Instagram page and her social channels. Again, check out Cynthia Thurlow there as well. I want to say thank you, everybody, for tuning in here to the Dr. Josh Ack Show. Remember, every week we're diving deep into the science and principles of how you can heal physically, mentally, and spiritually. Also, make sure to subscribe, like, and share, and leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. I can't wait to see you on the next episode. Hey, if you're watching on YouTube, I'd love to know, what is the number one thing that Cynthia shared today, or that we talked about when it comes to healing your hormones, supporting your body as you go through perimenopause and menopause? We'd love to hear from you if there's any action steps you're going to take, anything you learned, and what you're going to do about it.